he has spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J. Lauren Norris.
I was watching a video of a guy in a jiu-jitsu training class, and there were lots of people standing around, and the instructor was standing there giving very intense directions to a few people that were on the mat. A lot of people sitting around them, some standing around, other instructors. And a guy runs up behind the chief instructor, drops down on the ground and slaps him in the ankle. And nothing happens. He walks away and the guy laying on the ground kind of looks like an idiot, and that's the end of it. But it's not the end of it. Because he had a reason for slapping him in the ankle, which might actually shock you. But I'll tell you the rest of that in just a minute.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J. Lauren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and you might ask, why in the world would you drop on the ground, on your face, in front of a guy standing in the middle of a room with a bunch of other people watching and slap him in the ankle? I thought it was kind of bizarre looking myself. But if you read the captions really close, what you see is that he was aiming for something. And he missed. He missed his target. Ironically, a few minutes later, and in the video clip it's stitched because it was a reel, so the whole thing's like a minute long. But a few minutes later, Mr. I'm going to jump on my face and slap your ankle is standing with his back to the crowd, and the instructor executes the move properly. Slaps the man in the ankle. He takes about 2 steps and falls flat on his face. See, apparently this slap to the ankle is a specifically recognized in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu pressure point. A pressure point that when you hit it, you lose function. It's like being struck in the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve. And when that particular nerve is struck in the body, you can cause anything from an instant stroke to temporary blindness to body paralysis from the neck down. I mean, the list just goes on. And there are more than one pressure point in the human body. Those pressure points are in every extremity and in the main torso and in your head. If you watch somebody in MMA or boxing, there are places they look to strike: in the chin, in the jaw, at the top of the head, in the forehead, in the temple. And some of those are specifically designed for a specific reaction: to break equilibrium, to knock somebody unconscious, to temporarily shut them off. It's like a shut-off switch. I remember watching Equalizer 3 with Denzel Washington. And there's a scene where the thug in town is threatening everybody in town, and he's face to face with one of the guys that he's trying to intimidate. And Denzel Washington is sitting across the room. The thug realizes, this guy's watching me. He goes over to the table and sits down to threaten Denzel as well. And Denzel says, understand, I'm not the guy you think I am. And so when the guy decides he's going to, bully up, he's got 6 or 7 bodyguards with him. He's got all of his other thugs with him. And Denzel takes a hold of his hand and says, by the way, that's the median nerve. And right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, what you're experiencing is about level 2 pain. And if I continue to do this at level 3, you'll begin crying like a little girl. And at 4 or 5, you might have to change your pants. He doesn't say it quite so politely. At 6, you'll be unconscious from the pain. But level 2, he was enough pain that he convinced all the other bodyguards to leave the room at his behest, and he took his gun out of his waistband and laid it on the table at level 2, and before he got to 3, he had complete pain compliance. Now, you might be thinking, I didn't sign up to watch an episode about martial arts or physical abuse or assault or anything like that. Why are you telling me this? And I'm going to tell you, there is this leadership principle that is a double-edged sword for every leader. It's called vulnerability. And vulnerability on its face looks and sounds great. To be vulnerable, to be transparent, to be human, to expose your weaknesses so that other people know that you're not just some brass leader that has always had everything handed to them. You've got to be transparent. You've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be willing to show your softer side, so they say. I love the conversation between Joe Rogan and Dr. Jordan Peterson. And Dr. Jordan Peterson says, they tell us that we should be softer, that we should be vulnerable, that we should expose ourselves. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's nonsense. In fact, he goes on to say, you should be a monster who has your monster under control. You should be absolutely lethal and yet in control. That's what it means to be weak, to be meek, not weak. And I love the way Joe Rogan finishes that up. He said, have you ever heard the phrase, it's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in a war? Okay, let's pull that back into leadership for a moment. I just saw a recently didn't run for re-election after, I believe it was 6 terms in office as a state senator, posted literally just as I was setting up this morning. He said, leadership is not the title. It's showing up every day and doing the hard things that earn the title. That's what it means to be a leader. I agree. I also agree that it would be much better to be a warrior in the garden than to be a gardener in a war. I want people to know that if you mess with my family, you've unleashed a honey badger, and it ain't going to be nice. And in whatever way I can protect, defend my family, my country, my faith, I will. In whatever legal means, to whatever extent necessary, I will go the distance against you. Just know that. Don't provoke that. And we'll get along just fine. But I don't want to leave exposed those softer sides, those weaker areas. See, it's one thing to know that every human has the same vagal nerve or vagus nerve. I've heard it called both. I believe it's actually called the vagus nerve, but it's a vagal response. Every human has one. Every human has one. Every human has an Achilles heel. If you go back and read about Achilles, the mythological story, you'll understand what I'm talking about. The human body, though, has an Achilles heel, and when it's ruptured, you don't walk on it. If you're running and it ruptures, you don't run on it. You stop dead in your tracks. You're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to attack. You can be destroyed if you rupture your vagus, or you rupture your Achilles heel, or you tear a hamstring. Maybe you've heard the phrase, I was hamstrung by my opponent. Well, there's a literal combat technique, usually done with a knife, to hamstring someone quasi-permanently. Because sometimes if that's cut deep enough, it never grows back. But once the hamstring is done, you're done. Now, there are those who will throw a kick to the hamstring and have the same effect. What am I talking about? I'm talking about vulnerabilities and weaknesses. I'm talking about exposing yourself in a way that you might say, I was just being transparent. I was just being vulnerable. Well, sure you were. I'm sure you were. But here's something you need to know. Whether they're enemies or opponents, when you expose your weaknesses, people who are not on your team with your best interest at heart will use them. When boxers are being trained, they're always told, keep your knuckles to your eyebrows. Keep your knuckles to your eyebrows. Don't touch them because they can knock you out kinetically, but keep your knuckles up there. You got to protect your face against kicks, against punches. You've got to guard the most important part of your leadership, your head. The most important part of your human body, your head. No, you've got a vagus nerve. You've got Achilles heels. You've got hamstrings. You've got brachial arteries. You've got pressure points. You've got the femoral artery. Somebody can knock you unconscious with the right kind of connected blow to the femoral artery. If you don't know those things, you don't know what vulnerabilities you have to guard. Now, let me ask you this. Is your Achilles heel in the world of your finances? Is your Achilles heel in the world of your relationships, past relationships, current relationships, future prospective relationships? Is your Achilles heel the people that you've hired? Do you find yourself being a little vulnerable, exposing a little too much, telling things that, well, maybe somebody could use them against you? Because if they can and capitalize on it, they will. See, the moment you as a leader expose, be vulnerable, be authentic, you're taking a risk. And what are you risking? Well, everything. Because at the moment that you expose vulnerability, authenticity, transparency, at the moment that you expose those things, you're asking, without asking, the people in your immediate circle, can I trust you? Can I trust you to know what my weaknesses are, where my pressure points are, where you could bring me down easily? Oh, what do they know that you don't? How many people, for an example, wouldn't even know that they have a pressure point in their ankle that if it's slapped, smacked, punched, kicked, stepped on just right, that their vulnerability is that their entire body shuts down from top to bottom. I watched this man fall like a leaf on the floor when the instructor connected with that spot. It wasn't a hard hit. It wasn't a kick. He reached down and smacked him like you might smack a child, just in playfulness. But he landed it in just the right spot, and that pressure point shut the man's body down. Completely paralyzed for a few minutes, laying on the floor, couldn't even pick his arms up. If they know that about your weaknesses, if they know your vulnerabilities better than you do, what do you risk in that relationship? Everything. See, here's the challenge with most leaders. They don't know their own weaknesses. They don't know their own vulnerabilities. They haven't guarded themselves against attack. In the world of ministry, there's a great phrase that says, avoid all appearances of evil. Not just avoid the evil, duh. Don't be doing wrong things, but avoid the very appearance of evil. I'll give you an example of that. I have a couple of lady friends in ministry that when they need a ride from the airport, they might call and say, hey, are you available? Let me look at my calendar. Yes, I can pick you up at the airport. Who are you traveling with? Oh, I'm traveling by myself. Let me see if my wife is available. Because I'm not picking you up at the airport by myself. I'm not transporting you anywhere with you, a married female, and me, a married male, in the car together. It ain't going to happen. Why? Because that's the appearance. That's a vulnerability. That's a pressure point. That's something someone else could, you ready for this big giant word? Enormous word? Ends careers, changes worlds, exploit. Someone else could exploit that opportunity. Someone else could just take one picture with their cell phone, see us hanging out together and go, oh, look, her husband's not around. Your wife's not around. What does that mean? Well, nothing. But it only takes the impression. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Why? Because I know what my vulnerabilities are. Most of them. I know what my weaknesses are. Most of them. I know where the pressure points are. Most of them. And for those that I don't, my number one accountability partner for every thought that goes through my head is the woman I've been married to almost 30 years. I tell her stuff that I'm sure sometimes she goes, why would you even tell me that? But why would that thought even go through your head? But see, my level of transparency and honesty, my vulnerability at its highest level, my willingness to take a risk starts in my home. It starts in that one-to-one relationship. The one who has the most to lose if I lose it all. Why? Because she holds me accountable. And I expect her to. She has every password to every digital device that I have. She uses my laptop, my computer, my iPads, my cameras as often as I do. There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to see. When I have models come into the studio for me to shoot or video or photograph, she stays in the room. Most of the time, she's the escort for the people that I'm shooting. Why? Because I'm accountable. I know where vulnerabilities are. I know what risk looks like. I don't know all of my pressure points. I don't know all of my weaknesses, but I'm always on the guard for them and I'm always looking out for them. And I trust the people in my inner circle to point them out and go, you might want to take a look at that. You might be concerned about that. You might need to learn to guard that. I wouldn't say that in public. That's not the way you want people to perceive you. Now, is this a shell game of hiding things? Not so much as it is a matter of knowing that if you're human, you have weaknesses. If you're human, you have pressure points. Now, the greatest spies in the world have always used this. There's a very particular technique used by everybody from the KGB to the CIA to the NSA. It's called the honeypot. The idea of sending some young, attractive, espionage-trained individual into the realm of someone of power to corrupt them, to entice them, to bait them, to bring them to a place of vulnerable risk. Eventually, it turns into blackmail or a lawsuit or a suicide or a murder. Why? Because they're human. They have pressure points. They have weaknesses. Sometimes the pressure point is a threat to a family or a threat to finances. There was a very famous general recently who lost everything, gave up all of his financial assets to pay legal fees, ended up with a prison sentence because the pressure point that was used against him was his son. They said, if you don't do X, Y, Z, we're going to go after your son. Well, there was no guilt on either side, but that doesn't matter. In today's world where you're guilty by accusation, not guilty by conviction, just being accused is enough to destroy your career. I was just listening to a conversation between Mike Rowe and Neil McCullough, I think is his last name. He plays a villain. He's been in like hundreds of films, 137 or something, I think is what he said. But in addition to that, he's also he's been a villain 65 times. He's died on screen. He's an interesting cat. But at one point, because of his faith, he said, I don't do sex scenes and I don't kiss other women on screen. Period. Cost him his career. For 2 years, completely blackballed. Shut out of what he did to make a living. Lost his house. Lost his lake house. Lost his cars. Lost his well-being, his financial well-being destroyed. Why? Because he stood his ground. Because he had an opinion. It was a pressure point. It was a weakness. It was a vulnerability. It was a transparency. It was an authenticity. All he had to do was tell the truth in front of the crowd, and all of a sudden, he's blackballed. Now, there are things that you as a leader believe, live by, a code, honor, values, whatever you want to call them. And the reality is all of them are weaknesses. They may also be your core strengths. It may be what makes you you. It may be the thing that stands out the most prevalent when people talk about you. They talk about your brand. They talk about your service. They talk about what you offer. They talk about how good you are at what you do. And those core values that you hold on to, they make you the who that you are. But in a world of deception, manipulation, obfuscation, in that world, they're pressure points. They're weaknesses that you may not know to guard. Things that you truly, deeply believe and hold to the highest level of honor. Those convictions that make you decide and choose. Sometimes they need not be expressed at all. The warrior in the garden doesn't run around yelling, I'm a warrior, I'm a warrior, I'm a warrior. In fact, he may sit in the garden sipping tea. But don't disturb him. Let sleeping dogs lie. Because when you wake that giant, you may find something completely different than you expected. completely different than you perceived. Be a leader like that. Know what your weaknesses are. Appoint someone to guard them. Know what your weaknesses are. Be on guard for them yourself. Know what your Achilles heel is, what your vagus nerve is, where your brachial artery is, where your femoral artery is. Know that you've got to defend those things at all cost. Know what your weaknesses are in your business, in your marketing scheme, in your product delivery, in your client acquisition. Know what those weaknesses are. Appoint someone to guard them. Delegate someone whose assignment it is to pay particular attention to that thing so you don't have to. But also know this. There is no worse enemy than a good friend gone bad. They know where all the skeletons are hidden. Every mistake you've ever made, a good friend knows about. Every weakness you already have, a good friend knows about. There's a great phrase that says, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, because they're more dangerous. But a good friend gone bad, they know every weakness, every secret, every vulnerability you've never exposed. And if they can find a way to capitalize on it, they will. Usually they're the team players that are not so much in for the team. They're in the team, but they're really out for themselves. And it becomes obvious. They're not the ones who will come to you and say, hey, I noticed this the other day, and I didn't want to say anything in front of everybody else, but I think you ought to know about it. They're the ones that will wait until you're in public and say, wow, you really ought to try this. I've had those people in my life. I've had to jettison them. And when you recognize them, don't play with kid gloves. These are vipers. These are adders. These are those little black snakes that you don't think much about until they bite you. Those little bitty asps, tiny little snakes. Looks like a giant earthworm. Venomous, poisonous, lethal in minutes. That's what it's like to have a friend in your inner circle who really has their own best interest at heart. They will turn their back on you in a heartbeat. Get to know those people in your inner circle. Now, I'm also going to tell you there's a really strange practice in a lot of inner circles that are cultish, not led well, but led with an iron fist. And that is, they will find the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses in everybody in the inner circle so that they can exploit them to have that leverage of loyalty. It's not genuine loyalty, it's forced loyalty. It's a pressure point that they hold against someone. There are groups like Epstein's Island where people engage in things at the risk of being exposed, knowing that if they ever go afoul of the inner circle, they will be exposed and it will destroy them. Why do you think that list is so tightly guarded? Even after all that has happened with Weinstein and the Island and Diddy, that list is guarded. Why? Well, because there are some vulnerabilities on there. There's some transparencies on that list. There's some people at risk on that list. Their pressure points have been identified. Their weaknesses have been called out. They have been made aware that we know where your weaknesses are, and we will exploit them against you if you don't play the game the way we want you to play the game. That's not the kind of leadership that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of leadership that is personally aware of my own misgivings, my own shortcomings, my own weaknesses and vulnerabilities. I guard my own pressure points to the best of my ability. I trust my accountability partner, my wife, my inner circle of friends to point those things out and go, you might want to take a look at that because that's going to be a problem if you're not careful. I expect that of them. I trust them to do that. I guard my vulnerabilities, and I challenge you to do the same as a leader. And as an inner circle member, if you're on someone's team and you're in that inner circle, remember that your loyalty, your willingness to tell them the truth, even when it hurts, but it's in their best interest, that's the greatest gift you could give someone who has served you as a leader. Someone who has made opportunity for you, made a way for you, made introductions for you, maybe even put money in your pocket as an employee or a partner. They deserve that kind of loyalty. They deserve that kind of opportunity to be guarded by you and their own weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and pressure points. You would expect the same of them. You would expect the same of the inner circle that you're building, the team that you're building, your family. They know your weaknesses. They know what you're up to. If you'll trust them to expose those things to you and not to others, then those things can be corrected and not exploited. But as a leader, you better know your weaknesses, you better know your pressure points, and you better guard them well. I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Loren is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Loren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Loren will serve you well.
Thank you.